Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am so glad you're here. If you're at all fascinated by how the physical world around us completely shapes the way we live, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're going on a pretty incredible journey across the globe to explore human-environment interactions. We'll be specifically zeroing in on the tropical and subtropical regions. We're going to look at how geographical features don't just sit there quietly in the background, but how they actively dictate human life. All right, let's dive right into this. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. 1. Humans and their environments. 2. Life in the Amazon Basin. 3. The changing Amazon rainforest. 4. The Ganga-Brahmaputra Basin. 5. Livelihoods on the river. And 6. The future of our basins. Let's get going. Section 1. Humans and their environments. Let's start with some foundational concepts. To really frame this, let's think about a great story from our source material about a young girl named Renuka and her uncle Shrikant, who's a wildlife photographer. Now, Renuka was totally fascinated by his pictures of people from all over the world. Some were from dry deserts, some from frozen lands, and some from these hot, wet rainforests. And she noticed they all looked completely different from her. But her uncle explained something really profound. He said that while their environments look radically different, they all actually share the exact same basic needs of life: food, clothing, and shelter. Nature simply dictates how we fulfill those shared needs. You know, kids in a desert play games and help their families just like kids in a rainforest do. They just learn to use different materials from their specific surroundings. Moving right along to Section 2, Life in the Amazon Basin. Let's check out the equatorial region. Picture the Amazon Basin. It lies directly on the equator, right between 10 degrees north and 10 degrees south. And this is exactly what we call the equatorial region. The river literally flows all the way from the mountains in the west, carving a massive path right across the South American continent to reach the Atlantic Ocean in the east. It's huge, spanning across Brazil, parts of Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, and a small part of Venezuela. Now, to really wrap our heads around a river of this scale, we have to talk about tributaries. These are simply the smaller rivers that join the main river. The main river, along with all these smaller tributaries that drain a specific area, forms what's called a river basin, or a catchment area. And this concept brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the Amazon. It is literally the largest river basin in the entire world. Okay, before we get into the wildlife, I have to share this fascinating bit of history. When Spanish explorers first, quote-unquote, discovered the Amazon River, they were actually attacked by local tribes who were wearing headgears and grass skirts. These fierce local fighters totally reminded the explorers of the legendary tribes of women warriors known from the ancient Roman Empire as the Amazons. And believe it or not, that is exactly how the Amazon River got its famous name. Since it sits right on the equator, the climate here is characterized by hot and wet conditions all year round. We are talking rain almost every single day, and the humidity is so intense your skin just constantly feels sticky. This creates forests that are so incredibly thick that the leaves and branches form a literal roof that blocks the sunlight from ever reaching the damp, dark ground. Up in that canopy, you'll find birds with just brilliantly colored plumage, like the toucan, which has this oversized bill specifically adopted for eating in this exact environment. And down on the ground, you have fascinating animals like the ant-eating tapir, right alongside sloths, monkeys, and massive reptiles like anacondas. So the absolutely crucial question is, how do humans actually survive here? Well, they use an ingenious method called slash-and-burn agriculture. First, they slash or cut down trees and bushes. Second, they burn them. This is super important because it releases vital nutrients into the otherwise pretty poor soil. Third, they grow their crops, things like tapioca, pineapple, and sweet potato, right there in the cleared field. And finally, when the soil inevitably loses its nutrients after a few years, they just abandon the plot. This allows the forest and the soil's fertility to naturally restore over time, before they eventually return to cultivate it all over again. Generally, the men hunt and fish, while the women take care of these crops, effectively keeping their families alive. They live in these really fascinating thatched houses shaped like beehives, or sometimes in large apartment-like structures called molokas, which features steeply slanting roofs just to deal with all that heavy rain. Which brings us to Section 3, the changing Amazon rainforest. Let's look at the impact of modern development. You know, back in the older days, prior to 1970, the heart of the forest could only be reached by actually navigating the river itself. But in 1970, everything changed. The Trans-Amazon Highway was constructed, making all parts of the rainforest accessible for the very first time. Aircraft and helicopters quickly followed. And the direct result of all this? The indigenous populations were pushed out of their ancestral areas and literally forced to settle in new regions just to practice their traditional farming. But all of this developmental activity comes with a really severe environmental cost. A massively large area of the rainforest has been disappearing annually. See, when you remove that thick forest canopy, there's absolutely nothing left to protect the ground from those heavy daily rains we just talked about. The topsoil is simply washed away. You can literally see how a lush, biologically diverse forest can rapidly turn into a completely barren landscape. All right, Section 4, the Ganga-Brahmaputra Basin. Let's shift gears to this massive subtropical basin. Welcome to the Ganga-Brahmaputra Basin. So, unlike the Amazon, which is equatorial, this basin lies in the subtropical region, between 10 degrees and 30 degrees north latitude. It's formed by the tributaries of the river Ganga, rivers like the Son, the Chambal, and the Kosi, along with the tributaries of the Brahmaputra. This basin covers a massive area with highly varied topography. You have the steep, dramatic foothills of the Himalayas, sprawling flat plains, and the massive Sundarbans Delta right where it meets the Bay of Bengal. Now let's talk about population density for a second, which is basically just the number of persons that live in 1 square kilometer. Up in Uttarakhand, which features those steep, kind of inhospitable mountain slopes, the density is only 189 people per square kilometer. But if you move down to the flat, super fertile plains of West Bengal and Bihar, the density absolutely explodes to over 1,000 people per square kilometer. It just goes to show that flat land provides the most suitable conditions for human habitation and, crucially, for growing crops. Section 5. Livelihoods on the river. What does life actually look like down on the plains? As you might expect, the main occupation around here is agriculture. This entire area is completely dominated by a monsoon climate, which brings heavy rains from mid-June all the way to mid-September. Because the plains have incredibly fertile soil and just abundant monsoon water, paddy, or rice, is the main crop here, since it requires a ton of water to grow. Alongside paddy, folks grow wheat, sorghum, gram, and millets. But in specific areas, cash crops really dominate. For example, you've got sprawling, beautiful tea gardens cultivated in Assam and West Bengal, while silk is produced through silkworm cultivation over in parts of Bihar and Assam. Let's zoom way in for a second and look at a really great micro-level case study from the source material that beautifully captures this human-environment harmony. Meet Binod. He's a fisherman living in Matwali Maun village in Bihar. Now, Binod thrives not on the main rushing river, but on an oxbow lake, which is basically a curved lake formed where a river once meandered and then got cut off. Binod and his fellow fishermen cultivate several different varieties of fish, and the local weeds that just naturally grow in the lake, like Vallisneria and Hydrilla, serve as perfectly natural food for those fish. On top of that, the land around the lake is super fertile, allowing them to sow paddy and maize. It is a completely satisfied, completely self-sustaining local economy. And sharing this basin is a wildly diverse array of wildlife, completely distinct from what we saw in the Amazon. While the Amazon gave us anacondas and tapirs, the Brahmaputra plain is famously home to the majestic one-horned rhinoceros. Head down into the delta area and you'll find the incredible Bengal tiger, along with crocodiles and alligators. In aquatic life, it absolutely abounds in the fresh river waters and the local lakes. And that brings us to Section 6, the future of our basins. How do we balance our needs? Take a look at this fascinating creature. This is the susu, also commonly known as the blind dolphin, and it's found in the fresh waters of the Ganga and Brahmaputra rivers. The incredibly crucial point here is that the susu is a literal living indicator of river health. If they are there, it means the water is clean. Tragically, though, these totally unique dolphins are currently being killed off. They're falling victim to untreated industrial and urban wastes, which have a huge chemical content, just being dumped directly into the rivers. And this circles us right back to Binod the fisherman. The source material makes this extremely clear. Binod's community lives in total harmony with nature, but only as long as the pollutants from nearby towns do not find their way into the lake waters. The reality is the Ganga-Brahmaputra plain has massively populated cities located right along the riverbanks. We're talking about places like Kanpur, Varanasi, Lucknow, Patna, and Kolkata. Every single one of these cities has a population of over 10 lakhs, that is over 1 million people each. And the wastewater from these massive urban centers and their industries is frequently discharged directly into the rivers. This leads to severe pollution, heavily threatening both the wildlife and the livelihoods of people exactly like Binod. Now, recognizing just how massive this challenge is, there have been some major systemic programs put in place. According to the texts, to accelerate efforts for universal sanitation coverage across the country, the Swachh Bharat mission was officially launched on October 2, 2014. Additionally, the Namami Gange program was initiated specifically to conserve the river Ganga and directly combat this massive pollution challenge. These programs represent organized, large-scale efforts to somehow manage the huge impact of dense human populations on these absolutely vital water sources. So this really leaves us with one massive, vital question. We started today by learning from Manuka's uncle that whether you live in a slashed-and-burned clearing in the sticky, humid Amazon or on a fertile oxbow lake over in Bihar, our basic needs are practically identical. But as our global population keeps growing and our massive cities continue to expand right along these life-giving rivers, how will we ever balance our universal human needs for development with the survival of the very environments that sustain us in the first place? It's a deeply complex interaction, and honestly, it's one we are all a part of. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep exploring the amazing world around you. Catch you next time.